Starmer's reluctance to directly answer whether he is part of the Westminster elite speaks to the complex relationship between political leaders and public perceptions. While he attempts to portray himself as a rule follower, ethical, and in touch with the needs of ordinary people, the public's frustration, as evident in many responses, is driven by the belief that political elites often receive preferential treatment or are disconnected from the challenges faced by the average citizen. Starmer's refusal to acknowledge whether he is part of the Westminster elite reflects a delicate political balancing act. Acknowledging it might reinforce negative stereotypes about politicians being out of touch or elitist, but denying it risks coming across as insincere, especially given his background and current position as leader of the Labour Party and a former barrister. The broader context, as outlined in the file you shared, is one of public outrage. People have expressed frustration that Starmer appears hypocritical, cutting essential benefits for pensioners while accepting gifts for pensioners while accepting gifts. Phrases like champagne socialism suggest that critics see him as someone who preaches equality and sacrifice for others while benefiting personally from elite privileges. His handling of the Arsenal ticket situation, where he justified sitting in a more secure section due to taxpayer cost concerns, was met with disdain by some, who saw it as an attempt to justify personal privileges. Many feel that someone in his position should lead by example, foregoing such perks altogether to demonstrate solidarity with the public. Public perception of authenticity is vital for political leaders, especially amid economic hardship and distrust in institutions. Starmer must balance appealing to both working-class voters and the political elite, but criticism from both sides highlights this challenge. His reluctance to distance himself from the Westminster elite label, while claiming authenticity, may lead to growing discontent as voters demand accountability and transparency. Labour, traditionally the party of the working class, faces criticism under Starmer's leadership for not addressing concerns about elitism and political disconnection. Controversies over gifts and public sector borrowing have fueled perceptions that Starmer's leadership may not align with the party's base. Upcoming budget decisions could further damage his image if public sacrifices are seen as too harsh, while politicians continue to enjoy privileges.
There's a lot of attention on your relationship with Arsenal. Can you clarify what it is?
Yes, very happily. I've had season tickets at Arsenal for a long time now, up in the stands, where I've gone with my boy and my friends for year after year after year. Now I'm Prime Minister. The security advice is that I can't go into the stands. Or if I did, you'd have to put so much sort of security in that it would cost the taxpayer a fortune. As a result, I've been offered tickets elsewhere in the ground where it's more secure. We don't have to use taxpayer money on additional security, and that's why I've taken the decision that I have. I think most people watching this would say, well, fair dues. I think they'd think I was pretty self-centred if I said, I'd much prefer to be in the stands, by the way. If I said, I'm going in the stands and you, the taxpayer, are going to have to pick up the tab for the security. I'm not really going to do
The phrase "I deserve freebies because I'm PM" suggests a perceived sense of entitlement on Starmer's part, fueling accusations that he is out of touch with ordinary citizens. Politicians, especially in leadership roles, are often expected to embody humility and responsibility. When the public perceives them as taking advantage of their position, it can lead to intense backlash. Starmer's acceptance of perks like a hospitality box at Arsenal, even if justified for security reasons, is being framed as an example of how the political elite live by different standards than the rest of the public. This perception is particularly damaging for a Labour leader, as the party is traditionally associated with fighting for working-class rights and advocating for fairness. The criticism that Starmer is making pensioners suffer reflects public discontent, as austerity measures like cutting the winter fuel allowance impact vulnerable groups. When leaders ask citizens to sacrifice while enjoying privileges, it deepens feelings of betrayal and highlights inequality. This contrast suggests Starmer's actions conflict with Labour's values of fairness and solidarity. The phrase "absolute piss" captures strong anger and frustration, reflecting growing disenchantment with perceived hypocrisy in political figures. This sentiment extends beyond Starmer, highlighting a broader frustration with political elitism, where leaders are seen as exploiting their positions for personal gain while ordinary citizens face hardships. The frustration is especially pronounced for Labour, traditionally seen as a champion of the underprivileged. Labour's core working-class voters may feel alienated by Starmer's actions, potentially turning to other parties or disengaging, which could weaken Labour's electoral prospects. Starmer must address these perceptions by showing he understands and represents the concerns of ordinary citizens.
I find it staggering that Keir Starmer is actually the biggest king of freeloading in Westminster. I mean, there's plenty of competition, by the way, but this bloke has claimed more freebies since 2019 than any other MP in Parliament. I find that quite staggering. How dare he lecture us about the need for tightening our belts? How dare he say that it's time for us to start spending a little bit less money? How dare he say it's time for us to pay a bit more tax? Sod off, Starmer. Simple as that.
Mike Graham tells Keir Starmer to sod off as he has declared more gifts and benefits than any other major party leader in recent times. Calling Starmer a freeloader implies that he is seen as someone who takes advantage of his position to enjoy perks without contributing or paying for them. This criticism suggests a broader resentment of politicians who are perceived to benefit personally from their roles while ordinary citizens face hardships. The public tends to hold political leaders to high moral standards, expecting them to lead by example. By accepting gifts or freebies, especially in the context of cuts to benefits like the winter fuel allowance, Starmer is seen as violating these expectations. The term freeloader reinforces the idea that he is out of touch with the sacrifices ordinary people are making.
Great British Energy already up and running and making decisions.
So we're making the legislation for Great British Energy hasn't been passed yet.
No.
The term champagne socialism is often used to criticize individuals who advocate for left-wing or socialist policies while living a lifestyle of wealth and privilege. In Starmer's case, accepting gifts like Arsenal hospitality tickets while presiding over policies that affect the working class feeds into this narrative. By advocating for policies that call for public sacrifice or increased austerity, Starmer is expected to reflect those values in his personal life. When he accepts luxury gifts or enjoys privileges, it creates a perception of double standards, that he asks the public to endure cuts while continuing to enjoy the benefits of his elite status. Many social media users feel betrayed, accusing Starmer of hypocrisy. As the leader of a party rooted in working-class values, his acceptance of personal perks while imposing hardships on vulnerable groups like pensioners increases the disconnection with his base. This hypocrisy erodes public trust, especially during economic hardship, deepening disillusionment and widening the gap between political elites and ordinary citizens. Labour, traditionally the party of the working class, has championed social justice and economic fairness. Starmer's acceptance of perks is seen as undermining this identity, fueling perceptions of disconnection from its base. If this continues, Labour risks losing support from working-class voters who may abstain from voting or shift to populist or more left-leaning parties.
What's it like being a Freemason? What's it like completely ignoring everything that's going on right now? Why aren't you opposing the government? Why aren't you standing up for our constitution? Why aren't you standing up for the Labour, for the working class man?
The file notes that public sector borrowing in August 2024 is the third highest on record, following only the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021. This highlights the strain on public finances, indicating that Labour's economic policies have not been able to significantly reduce borrowing despite higher tax revenues. This level of borrowing suggests that despite efforts to raise more through taxation, the government's spending needs, driven by factors like benefits uprating and higher public service costs, continue to exceed available resources. Public sector debt, reaching nearly 100% of GDP, indicates a precarious fiscal situation. Debt at such high levels limits the government's flexibility to invest in future growth or respond to unexpected economic shocks, and it often leads to higher interest payments, which divert resources away from essential public services. This creates a difficult situation for the Labour government. On one hand, they need to maintain essential services and fulfill public sector obligations, while on the other hand, they need to demonstrate fiscal responsibility and reduce borrowing to stabilize the economy.
I have repeatedly warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of circumstances since the Second World War. What I have seen in the past 72 hours has only confirmed that. Our economy has been held back by decisions deferred and decisions ducked. Political self-interest put ahead of the national interest. A government that put party first and country second. We face the legacy of 14 years of chaos and economic irresponsibility. That is why, over the weekend, I instructed Treasury officials to provide an assessment of the state of our spending inheritance so that I can understand the full scale of the challenge, and I will present this to Parliament before the summer recess. This will be separate from a budget that will be held later this year.
As Chancellor, Rachel Reeves faces tough economic challenges and must make difficult decisions in the autumn budget, potentially involving spending cuts, tax increases, or both. However, these measures may be politically unpopular, especially if they disproportionately affect Labour's working class base. The government must balance reducing borrowing without harming economic recovery. If Reeves' measures are seen as too harsh, they risk alienating already disillusioned voters. Labour's handling of this fiscal crisis will impact their political future. Success could restore confidence, while failure to address inequality may severely damage their electoral prospects. The public's reaction to Labour's fiscal management is crucial. If the budget brings more austerity or service cuts, Labour risks losing support from disillusioned voters or driving them to populist parties. Conversely, if borrowing isn't reduced, Labour could face criticism for fiscal irresponsibility, complicating governance. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join our free Telegram group linked in the description where we can discuss important issues freely and without censorship, and support each other. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member for exclusive content.